Hello, everybody. This is Trevor coming to you from my house, and welcome to the September Whiskey Club, the Eureka Whiskey Club virtual tasting. I have the honor of being joined by two more handsome bearded gentlemen than myself, and excited to talk all things Wild Turkey. So hopefully everyone. First of all, I just want to apologize to all our members. We did have some logistical issues with some shipping and weather delays with the product. So I know our pickup date was a few days later than what it normally is. But hopefully everyone was able to get their whiskey. If you haven't got your whiskey yet, I believe it should be available at most of the restaurants, and we've informed you if it's not quite available yet. So thank you to everyone for understanding these kind of unpredictable and really uncontrollable weather delays with all the hurricanes and stuff going on and just all that stuff. But I am super excited again to have Benny Hurwitz and Bruce Russell from Wild Turkey join me this evening, and really excited about this month's pick. And gentlemen, please introduce yourself, and then after that we'll talk some prize giveaways for the evening. Benny, you want to go first?
Sure.
All right.
All good. So I'm Benny Hurwitz. I'm the portfolio ambassador for Wild Turkey Distilling Co. I'm based in Los Angeles, grew up in Maryland, outside of DC, where I was a bartender for a long time. Worked in a big whiskey bar out there called Jack Rose for about a decade. And yeah, most of my bartending career was serving whiskey and getting to taste it and try it and learn all about it.
Cool.
Yeah. Hey, y'all.
Bruce.
My name is Bruce Russell. I'm the Wild Turkey portfolio. What do they call me now? The brand educator is my title right now. And I'm also the manager of the Private Barrel program. And let's talk some Wild Turkey. I'm excited. Awesome.
And then as we've been doing for these past few months, we have some exciting giveaways. The lovely people over at Wild Turkey outdone themselves this month. So we have 3 prizes. We have a first place prize, a second place prize, and a third place prize to give away tonight. And that's going to be based on questions. So we'll give, at the end here, Benny and Bruce will convene and pick, their top 3 questions. And we have some fun stuff to give away. Third prize is going to be a Wild Turkey backpack that has, would you say, Benny, has a shaker tin in it, and what else?
Yeah, it's actually a Russell's Reserve backpack.
Oh, Russell's Reserve.
Right, it's got a mixing glass and a strainer and another like small tote bag inside. So bags on bags.
That's third place. Second place is a Wild Turkey neon sign, which is super rad. And then first place, Bruce is going to be signing along with, did we confirm the other signees, Bruce, on the bottle?
Yeah. Dad and Granddad are going to sign it as well.
All right. So Eddie Russell and Jimmy Russell will also be signing a bottle of Wild Turkey Rare Breed for the first place winner, whoever asked the best question. So please leave your questions in the comments. You can ask questions at any point during the virtual tasting here, and we'll try to get as many as possible. And like I said, we'll choose the top 3 at the end. So moving right in. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Wild Turkey. I think, Benny, you were going to kind of kick it off for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you can't talk about Wild Turkey without talking about the history a little bit. Pretty much everybody's heard of us, whether it was your grandma or your crazy uncle that drank Wild Turkey at family gatherings, or maybe you drank a little Wild Turkey before you shouldn't have been drinking at all. These are common stories that we hear during our travels.
Grandma put it on your gums when you were teething.
Listen, 21 and older, please. But there's good reason why, of course, beyond these experiences, people have heard about Wild Turkey. We've been around almost 80 years. The brand started around 1942, but where we make the bourbon and rye down in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, they've been making bourbon since the 1860s. So it actually started with a family called the Rippies. They came over from Ireland, used what they knew about making whiskey from malt. And then, of course, already by then, bourbon was becoming in vogue, and they used what they knew to then apply that to what was bourbon. The Rippies, the original Rippy brothers themselves, didn't make it too far in the industry. It was actually their sons after them that really built up the distilling in that part of Kentucky, which is Anderson County and Lawrenceburg, again, where we are today. So if you go down to our distillery, I highly recommend spending a day out that way. There's a couple other great distilleries you can visit. But when you're at Wild Turkey, we'll actually take you to our oldest warehouse on the property, which was built in 1894. It would have been used by the same Rippy family that I was just speaking of. So back then, around that same time, actually, in 1893, the Rippy Brothers Bourbon was chosen to be featured at the Chicago World Exhibition, or the World Fair Exhibition. So pretty big honor, of course. Back then, there was over 400 different bourbons being made in Kentucky, a number that we're still not quite back up to today. So to be chosen then was a pretty big honor to be represented at a World's Fair, literally saying to the world, this is Kentucky bourbon. So the reason why we talk about the Rippies, not only did they pave way for what we do now in our part of town, where we are, but the Rippies generations later were still involved in the distilling industry after Prohibition. So, remember, it was the Rippies' sons who built it up. After them, they had a master distiller, a guy named Bill Hughes. He then, manned the reins of distilling there up until Prohibition. After they did have to close, unfortunately. They weren't, one of the 6 very few selected bourbon distilleries that were allowed to stay open. But when they closed, they, had plans eventually to get things going if the chance ever came back. And in the 1930s, it was actually the Rippy's great-granddaughter, Olivia Rippy, who was still in the business at the time. I believe she was the one that was able to get Bill Hughes to come back. Remember, Bill Hughes, literally a man who was making bourbon before Prohibition, so he's much older now. He comes back. They start making their bourbon. At the time, it really wasn't necessarily called Wild Turkey. Wild Turkey itself started about a decade later in the 40s. So the brand was created by a company out in New York called Austin Nichols. So if any of y'all have seen any older Wild Turkey bottles, I mean, even up till about 2011 or 12, we still had Austin Nichols on the label. So it's a name that might ring a bell. They were the ones that actually came up with Wild Turkey after taking some of this bourbon from that same distillery on a hunting trip. You can guess what they were hunting. The bourbon was right around 8 years old. It was right around 101 proof, and that's what they stuck with. So that same Wild Turkey that your grandma or your uncle drank, or maybe you drank back in college, that was that original 101. So there's a big moment now in Wild Turkey history after the 40s into the 50s where a guy named Jimmy Russell starts at the distillery. So I'm going to pass it to Bruce to talk about his grandfather.
Yeah, sure. So like Benny was saying, Granddad started in 54. He started at 19 years old. And we are unlike some distilling families where, a lot of the families that are involved in the industry, they were involved.
I thought it was 21 and over only, Benny.
Not back then.
I know.
He wasn't drinking. Well, who knows? But knowing Jimmy. But you could actually work at the distillery younger than you can now. Now it's like you have to be 21 to basically have any job on site. But back then, I think it was 18. But Jimmy got a job at 19 years old. And unlike a lot of other families, like the Beams, they were kind of around since the beginning, or the Brown Foreman family were around since the beginning and whatnot. We weren't the originators, like Benny was saying, of our distillery operation. It was the Rippies in the beginning. We were just kind of right place at the right time. My great-grandfather, Jimmy's dad, actually worked at the distillery as well. And he was just kind of a bottom rung maintenance guy, kind of a handyman, do a little bit of everything. And my grandmother actually started working at the distillery before Jimmy did. She's the one that helped to get him his job. She was the secretary at our distillery. And she's a few years older than him, and he was just kind of a kid. He had aspirations of playing professional baseball, and was pretty good. Was probably good.
What position?
He pitched, and he also played infield. I think he played like second base, shortstop. But pitching was like a big thing for him, and that's kind of how he became master distiller, to be honest. Because back then, these companies used to have these semi-pro baseball teams, and Jimmy got a job at the distillery, and his brother, who actually just passed away, my great uncle, he got a really good job at this electric company. Neither of them had any experience, but they got these really good jobs because both of them were kind of like ringers for these semi-pro teams. And so Jimmy got set up with a really, really good position. And his first job was actually in the lab doing like quality control with Bill Hughes, our master distiller at that time, that guy Benny was talking about. And so I think it's super interesting, and it really influences our style of whiskey that Jimmy actually learned from a man, probably the last guy that was still around, who made pre-Prohibition whiskey. Bill Hughes made our whiskey before Prohibition, came back after Prohibition, was an old man, grandfatherly in age when Jimmy started in 54. And kind of right place at the right time. Him and Jimmy got along. He started teaching Jimmy everything he knew. And then just 13 years later, Jimmy was my age, right around 32 years old. Bill Hughes died at the distillery on the job. And Jimmy was the one who knew everything that Bill knew. And so whether the company wanted to or not, and this was before Austin Nichols was around. This is before we were Wild Turkey Distillery. I've got the picture up here just to the side of me where it still says JTS Brown on everything back in the 60s and definitely back in the 50s when Jimmy started. We didn't actually go only to Wild Turkey until 71 when we got bought out by a tobacco company. So Jimmy started in 54, master distiller at 67. And back then, it was a much bigger job than anybody has today because we weren't making money. It wasn't as serious of a business as it is right now. And so Jimmy was master distiller. He was plant manager. He was the head of HR. He was the union guy. Like he was everything. And luckily for the company, Jimmy was really good at it and loved it. And, was the kind of guy that liked being at work 60 hours a week. He just really, really took to the industry. And in my opinion, I think you can put the whiskey that he made himself, especially in the 60s and 70s and 80s, because that's the stuff that's in the bottles in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I put it up there with anybody's whiskey. He was making incredible juice back then, and it's what I think is kind of interesting. He's not doing his own stuff. He's just doing what he's been taught by Bill Hughes. When it comes to our recipes, and we'll talk about production a little bit later, but when we talk about recipes, our yeast, the way we distill, the way we age, it all comes back from what the Rippies were doing back in the 1860s. Because that's who Bill Hughes learned from. And then Bill taught that to Jimmy. Dad's the current master distiller in 2021. We've been around since the 1860s. And Dad's only the fourth master distiller we've ever had. And so really it's only through apprenticeship is how you kind of like learn how to make Wild Turkey, I guess. And it is much more automated today. Like me and Dad will never have to make whiskey the way Jimmy did, where he actually stood over fermenters with a big stick and stirred it. Or, he actually had to take the proof off the still regularly every day. We have an automated system that does everything for us now.
Yeah.
So it's a lot different. So Jimmy definitely is kind of the last of his kind.
Is Jimmy still the head of HR or?
No. Lord, no. And it's probably good for the company. Probably good for the company because it was a lot. I even remember as a kid, running around the distillery in the 90s. It was a lot more carefree, a little bit looser.
Yeah.
Everybody seemed they had a pre-shot before they started working back in the day. It's a lot different now. It's a lot more buttoned up. But, Jimmy, he's stuck with the brand, and most people think like whiskey has been bad until recently with the whiskey boom, but that's not true. When Jimmy started in the 50s, we were doing well. Bourbon was doing really well in the 50s and 60s for the most part, and on into the 70s, we weren't really suffering. It wasn't really until my dad started, unfortunately for him, in 81. He kind of came right in right before bourbon started to go down. Jimmy was master distiller for a long time. Had multiple kids. Nobody else wanted to get into the industry. Dad didn't want to get into the industry. He was actually playing college football, a place called Western Kentucky. One summer, he hitchhiked back home from Western Kentucky, which is a few hours away. He was just staying in my grandparents' house, bumming one summer, doing some stuff he probably wasn't supposed to be doing in the late 70s. And Jimmy got mad at him and said, "You better get a job." And so my grandma and a couple people at the distillery, because Jimmy never hired my dad. And Dad's still salty to this day about it. And Dad got hired on by a couple guys that my grandma was friends with, and my grandma, put in some good words, I think. And he got hired on as a summer laborer and fell in love with it and just never left. Started in the summer of '81. And he started he's the only one of us that's had to do that between me, Dad, Jimmy, and I have a cousin, Joanne. Even Benny, who's part of the family now, adopted. But none of us had to work from the bottom up. Me and Benny have never worked in the union at the distillery. Neither has Jimmy. That's something only my dad has done. He started as the bottom man in the union. He rolled barrels. He stacked cases in the bottling plant. He painted fences. He cut the grass. He really did do everything. And I think that's really influenced kind of his style of whiskey making. And he got put in pretty quickly into the barrel rolling and warehouse crews. And that's kind of what he did most of my life growing up. He was the warehouse supervisor and then eventually like the inventory manager, so in control of all our barrels. And he did that from '81 on into probably the late 90s, early 2000s. When Russell's came about, the Russell's 10, that was the first thing Dad really ever did on his own. It kind of proved to the company like he can actually do this. And so then he kind of got in a position, was associate distiller for a very long time. And then recently was master distiller, just, not that long ago, within the last decade. And then I started at 21. My cousin Joanne started at 21. We've had very similar experiences to my dad. We both got summer jobs. I was determined not to do this. I think Joanne went into it thinking, maybe I'll do this. I'll see. I didn't want to do this. I was going to school for engineering, I believe, at the time. I wanted to be a robotics engineer, and came to the distillery and took a couple tours with my dad and Jimmy. I call Jimmy Mimi, so I don't call him Granddad. That's why I usually don't call him anything but Jimmy. But Dad and Jimmy were taking me around the distillery and giving me tours. And these are two men that don't speak at home. They're very like rough and strict, and you're on your P's and Q's around them when you're a kid growing up, for sure. And to hear them kind of just like a lot of y'all have heard them speak, because I know quite a few of the people that are in the chat tonight. And if you ever get to hear Dad or Jimmy talk about whiskey, they'll talk for hours and hours and hours, like me and Benny will. And to see that part of them, I knew then, like, I'm not leaving. This is cool, The whiskey was always pretty cool, but I grew up in Lawrenceburg. Everybody worked in the distillery. It's not a big deal. And I was an adult before I really knew the importance of like Jimmy in the whiskey world. And so I never grew up aspiring to be a master distiller or anything. But I saw this different side to Dad and Jimmy, and so I just never left, and have since really grown to love all parts of the industry. And I know I've hung out with some of you all whenever I'm out in California or wherever else I might have met you, and y'all know I love the industry. I have a blast doing my job, and I'm very lucky to be able to do it. So I think overall in the history, our kind of goal as a family now is just to continue on what Jimmy learned, to continue on a legacy that we didn't start, but that we're super proud of, in the way that we make and age whiskey and the flavor profiles of our whiskey and where we're from, like all of it. And we're just lucky to be here, to be honest. And that's something I think that really shows through when you hear Dad or Jimmy or me or Joanne or any of us speak. And hopefully we'll continue to make really good whiskey. I think me and Benny and hopefully everybody here can agree too, that some of the stuff we've done in the past few years with Campari is unlike anything we've ever done in our history. So I'm super excited to see what's going to come in the future.
That's awesome. I mean, you said you didn't spend much time at the distillery when you were a kid, but do you have like a first memory at the distillery, or like a favorite memory? As growing up.
I spent quite a bit of time there.
Okay.
It's just everybody worked at the distillery. It wasn't a big deal. It would be like, if your dad worked at a car dealership,
yeah,
who cares about cars? But yeah, like Benny's dad works for, I think, GM. And it wasn't exciting to me because that's what everybody in Lawrenceburg did. But yeah, I remember, as a kid, there was this big old guy named Keith James that worked under my dad. And Keith was like, he's like the fun uncle. He would slip me money to go get candy out of the vending machine, or I'd ride around and, they'd let me stick my finger on some of the bourbon candy, the stuff that leaks out of the barrels. And I was a little kid, so I thought that was super scandalous, and they were just like nice guys at the distillery that would let me tag along because I got on Dad's nerves, And then just like Benny said, of course, at 21, I'm not going to say how old I was when this happened, but there was a time that my dad took me and my brother aside when we were younger than we are now and really took the time to explain to us what he was trying to do with this whiskey that Jimmy was doing. And he was just like really proud of this whiskey, and we got to try when I was a younger fella. And ever since then, I was kind of a little bit hooked on it because of Dad telling me the story and the sentimental value to him, and to see him really care about something like that.
And that was Russell's Reserve, or which one did you
No,
say that was?
it actually ended up being stuff that was going to go into American Spirit, which was a product that came out in 2007. And I first tried it probably, well, I'm not going to say how many years before.
That's all good.
Yeah, but a few years before that came out. And it's funny because, I was a younger person, and my brother is even 3 years younger than me. And I've never really stopped drinking bourbon since. I kind of fell in love with it right then with the story aspect. And I've always liked it. My brother, I don't think, has had a sip of whiskey to this day since.
Really?
Whiskey drinker. Yeah, he drinks one beer and he's blackout drunk. He's not like the rest of us.
Well, I used to sneak pours of my mom's boxed wine in the fridge. So, I think I think you probably had a little bit better experience than I. But
most people would think that, but believe it or not, even though growing up I did have access to a lot of good whiskey, I was doing most of the same dumb stuff everybody else was. If you saw what I was drinking when I wasn't supposed to be, you'd probably laugh, considering I was giving up, pretty much free rare breed in the garage, especially the 118 stuff, the really good stuff.
Nice. So I was hoping to talk a little bit more about the production process, and maybe we can get into kind of the different rick houses. I just want to highlight, so everyone, as always, should have got a card that has, some info on it, tasting notes, kind of where the barrels came from. And then on the back here, you have your barrel number and then the date it was filled and the rick house it came from. So I'd love to get into talking about production and grains and fermentation and kind of the maturation process with you guys.
Cool. Yeah, I'll kick that off. So, just to kind of wrap up the history as well, kind of ties into our production style. Bruce said, one family taught another guy how to make this whiskey before Prohibition. He came back after. He taught Jimmy Russell. Jimmy Russell's still alive, working at Wild Turkey, along with his son Eddie, and of course Bruce right here. And for the majority of that time, or at least the beginning, 25, 30 years of Jimmy's career, he only really made one thing. And if you ask Jimmy today, he'll still tell you he only makes one thing, and that's Wild Turkey. And what he means by that is we only use one mash bill. So our percentage of grains, our recipe that goes into our bourbon and our rye respectively. So 2 mash bills technically if you're talking bourbon and rye. 1 yeast strain, which is proprietary to Wild Turkey. We cultivate it at the distillery. We'll talk a little more about that. And then the fermentation, distillation, all the way down to the number 4 charred American white oak barrels. It's all the same, and it's meant to be the same every single day because that's what Jimmy's all about. So again, remember, he only made 101 bourbon for the first 25 years of his career. He started to expand with Rare Breed in the 90s, Kentucky Spirit single barrel, which we're going to try here in a bit. And then, of course, Russell's Reserve came a little bit later down the line. But again, it's that same mash bill, same yeast, same process. So can't tell you the exact mash bill, of course, because that's still one of our secrets to this day that Jimmy doesn't like to talk about. We're kind of known in our core products like Wild Turkey 101 for being high rye mash bill, but that's, not necessarily the case. I would say that we have a pretty traditional mash bill that has a high rye flavor to it. So if you do a little Googling and research, you can probably find the Wild Turkey mash bill. I won't confirm or deny, but you'll see if you do see those proportions or find them out, you'll see it's pretty traditional, but it's got a nice rye content. And it's all about the quality of the grains that we use, because that's where it starts. So just like in 1954, when non-GMO grains didn't really exist, we don't use GMO grains today. So we're 100% non-GMO. Our corn is coming from mostly Kentucky and Indiana, so it's 100% American grown. Our barley comes from the Dakotas and Montana, gets malted in Milwaukee. Also, again, non-GMO, US grown. And then our rye actually is coming mostly from Europe right now. I think we have got some here recently from the States. But when you think about it, rye is not something we consume much of here in the US outside of whiskey, and especially outside of the last decade and a half, even in whiskey. You know, if you've eaten rye bread recently, I guarantee it was on a Reuben or a pastrami sandwich, right? Like, we're not really eating rye bread with our breakfast and stuff. But then when you go to Western Europe, Germany, Poland, Denmark, these places, rye bread is a way of life. Germany is the biggest rye producer in the world, and that's where we're probably going to get most of our rye from. Again, non-GMO being an important factor to us, part of that's tradition. It might not play the biggest role in the final product, but we know that when it's grown that way, that we're going to get a quality product and a flavorful product. So that's where our rye is coming from. We get all those grains down to Kentucky. Before they're even allowed into the distillery, into the facilities, they get tested. So there's literally one person that sits down in a little room and waits for these trucks to pull up full of grains. And before then they can get pulled into our system, they're going to take a sample off that truck, check the grains for moisture, mildew, mold, what have you. Also check the quality of the kernels themselves. Are they crushed and cracked already from transport? Or are they still whole and intact? So we really want these beautiful, whole, plump, fresh grains, right? Obviously, moisture content is important as well. I believe it's like below 14% is what we're looking for. So they're fairly dried out. And then we got to cook those grains, because the big part there is converting your starch into sugar. So these are all really starchy grains, but we need sugar to make alcohol. So just like you would make a beer, you're going to cook all your grains down. We're not going to just dump them all together and cook them all together, though. We're going to do it in phases where we're adding first corn, then rye, then barley at specific temperatures, so that, again, we can retain the flavor and the character of these grains. If you think about the breads, you know, we mentioned rye bread, but cornbread, malt, you don't really make bread from. We use a considerable amount of malt in our mash bill, though. And, you know, malts, they're all cereal grains, but malt is the one that you really associate with cereal, I would say. And it's got that kind of bready taste as well. Rye has got a little spice, right? A pepperiness and herbal character. And corn is a lot sweeter. And that's just in terms of the breads and other foods that we eat from these grain products. Now, that does translate into the whiskeys. So when you're cooking these grains, you don't want to overcook your rye and your barley especially, because that's where you're getting a lot of your flavor from in terms of rye. And then in terms of barley is where you're getting a lot of your enzymes. So these enzymes that are within the barley are more prominent than they are in the other grains. And the specific enzyme called amylase is actually what's going to go in and kind of eat the starch and turn it into sugar. So when that happens, we now have this really sugary, sweet mash, this wort, kind of like, you know, imagine like a sweet oatmeal of sorts, and that's ready to be fermented. So this is where our yeast comes into play. Again, it's a proprietary yeast, meaning only we have it, and we cultivate it. So cultivating is the phase in yeast where you actually grow the yeast. So remember, it feeds off sugar, obviously. So when we're starting with a single cell of yeast in a petri dish from our lab, and we want to grow it into 500 liters of yeast to go into a 30,000 gallon fermentation tank, that takes probably about 5 days or so. And what we're doing is we're feeding this yeast simple sugars, and it's doubling in size. Like, you know, every 20 minutes, as long as you keep feeding it, this thing is growing. We transfer it over and over until we get it into this tank. And if you go to Wild Turkey Distillery, like I mentioned before, not only will you see our 128-year-old warehouse amongst many other warehouses, but you'll see our cook room, our yeast room, our fermentation room, all of which there are only one. There's no facade. So when you come to Wild Turkey, you're seeing all the equipment, all the facilities, everything that makes every drop of these products that you're actually enjoying with us tonight. So I think that's really special to point out as well, is that Wild Turkey is all made in one place, whether you're drinking it in California or Washington State or all the way in Japan, So our fermentation, our yeast, remember, it's this proprietary yeast. It's a wet yeast. It's a living organism. Yeast thrives in certain environments, acidic environments, around 80, 85 degrees, right? So that's how we want our mash to be. And another really cool way I like to compare our yeast and put it in perspective is if you've ever baked bread, or if you're familiar with sourdough bread versus just your standard bread, where you grab a bag of instant yeast from the grocery store. Our yeast is like the sourdough starter. It's wet, it's alive, it's growing. Whereas the dry yeast, the instant yeast, comes in a little pouch, and you rip it open, you mix it with sugar water, and then it comes to life. So, you might think, oh, well, that's cool. Doesn't everyone do that? It's not the case, actually. So again, our proprietary yeast that we cultivate, we're one of the last big distilleries doing that. Some of the others will go for that dry bagged yeast. And it's not a bad thing. Again, it's just different. Remember, we have a guy that's literally been making these products for almost actually just celebrated 67 years. So, that was like a week ago, Jimmy Russell celebrated his 67th anniversary at Wild Turkey. And the fact that we have him still around is the fact that we're able to uphold these very traditional and old school methods. We have someone there that can speak to them when they were the only options and the best options. So we still think they're the best options today. And we know that we've been using this same yeast for at least the last 67 years that Jimmy has been there. Of course, it's unlikely this yeast was from before Prohibition because we were closed. But again, the practices, the production, the methods, the mash bill, all of this stuff could have very well come from the Rippies, passed down to Bill Hughes, passed to Jimmy, and is still what we do today. So that yeast is going to ferment that wash or that wort or that mash for about 3 days. At that point, we'll have about a 10 to 12% beer that's going to go into a holding tank that we call the beer well. That allows us to continuously ferment, pretty much 7 days a week, and keep a continuous flow that allows us to run our stills almost, I think, 24 hours a day. So I'm going to pass it to Bruce actually to talk a little bit about the distillation, and then we'll get into some maturation as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Benny. I appreciate it. Just want to make sure we reserve some times on questions here. So we probably just have a few more minutes. I want to taste the whiskey as well and get everyone's thoughts. While Benny was giving us all that amazing info, just a reminder, there is a cocktail recipe on your cards this month. This is a phenomenal whiskey to drink by itself, but if I'm drinking this whiskey in a cocktail, I'm doing something spirit forward. So we have Campari, we have vermouth, which please refrigerate your vermouth. I did pull this from the refrigerator. And our Wild Turkey Kentucky Spirit, and I made a Boulevardier. Everyone should have that recipe. So if you have time during the call, feel free to follow the recipe and make yourself a Boulevardier. I'll be sipping on that while pass it to Bruce, and let's talk some maturation, rickhouses, aging.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit of distillation and maturation. I did see one question go through that I'll be able to answer super quick. And that is, do we use non-GMO rye? As far as I'm aware, there is no such thing as GMO rye or malt. Corn is the thing with GMO. So no, we don't use GMO anything. So like Benny was talking about before, how we're just kind of carrying on a style of whiskey that really does date back to the 1800s. That's really what influences the way we distill as well. Government regulations have changed kind of what we can do whenever they actually set federal regulations for what bourbon can and cannot be, because it is the native spirit to the United States. The federal government can tax us, and they can also tell us exactly what we're allowed to do. One of those things is distillation proof. we can distill no higher than 160 proof and still be considered a bourbon. Well, we distill much lower than that, and we always have. Generally, people are going to distill around 120 to 160. A lot of people do tend to distill higher. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What you're going to do, though, is when you're taking things off at different temperatures, not only are you going to have, different proofs in different amounts of alcohol to water, but you're also going to have different alcohols and different congeners and esters and flavoring components. And when you do get higher than 160, I think that your flavor profile does become just a little bit simpler. I don't think that's always necessarily a bad thing. You're just not going to get as many of kind of the flavor development alcohols or esters as you're going to get when you distill a little bit lower proof like we do. So we distill generally right around 130. I'm still at the distillery every week just about, and unless I'm on the road. And most of the time when I look over there, we're distilling right at 128, usually when it's coming off the second distillation. So we're distilling quite a bit lower than the regulation dictates. The reason for that is because we're going to draw off more quote-unquote fusel alcohols. I think the actual definition of that is bad alcohol, because they're alcohols that if you drank a bunch of, they probably wouldn't be very good for you. Stuff like methanol and butanol and propanol and stuff like that. It's the reason in Kentucky they say don't drink too much moonshine, or at least bad moonshine, because it'll make you go blind. It's because if you don't know what you're doing, you will have a little methanol in there, and it is kind of scary. But it's actually those different alcohols that develop all the cool, funky flavors that you find in really good spirits. So everybody just thinks of ethanol, corn alcohol, as being kind of the primary thing. And while that is going to be the majority of the alcohols found in something like bourbon whiskey, ethanol is very, very simple. It's going to just be kind of caramel, sweetness, grain forward, cereal grain kind of taste. And it's those other alcohols that actually develop into the delicious parts of whiskey to me, which are fruit notes, kind of deep chocolates and caramels and cocos and cinnamons, earthy notes, floral notes. Any kind of complex or well-matured whiskey is going to be distilled at a low proof, because without those alcohols, those flavors can't even ever develop. And so it's a combination of the way we distill and the way we age that I think we're able to pick up such a complex flavor profile. And while Wild Turkey is definitely not known as kind of like a simple, easy sipper in the way some other brands are, there's a reason why a lot of our shirts and advertising and everything now just says bold really big on it. It's because that's kind of the flavor profile that Jimmy's always made. It's big. It's in your face. It's got a whole lot of flavor. It's got heat. It's not afraid to be kind of full force whiskey. And that starts with our distillation. We're distilling at a low proof, so we're going to pick up more flavors that way. And then once it's done distilling, we're going to put it into the barrel. Another regulation, you can't put it into the barrel higher than 125 proof. 125 is pretty much the industry standard at this point. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. That's how you get really, really good high-proof whiskeys. I was trying a whiskey out of Buffalo Trace a couple weeks ago that was like 144 proof or something like that. And it was really good, let me tell you. But we never really find anything that high because we're putting it into the barrel a little bit lower at 115. We originally put it into the barrel at 107. We decided to raise it not that long ago, actually, in the grand scheme of things. And I think it did probably change the flavor profile just a little bit on a lot of the finished stuff. But it was really hard for us to make proof when we were putting it in at 107 for, I think, the products that we would need today. When it was at 107, generally we were only making one product, and it was 101. But now with the Ranger products that we have, I think it does benefit us to be a little bit higher at 115. But you can see the proof doesn't really change that much in the barrel. It can if you're picking top four, bottom four, but like Rare Breed is our barrel proof, comes out at 116.8 right now. So there's not that much change from the 115 to the 116. I think
where's that extra proof coming from if it goes in at 115?
It's a good question. So this is your barrel, shaped like a barrel, right? Whiskey's sitting in there. If this white oak, which is all we use, American white oak. White oak is unique in the way that its membrane is. So its membrane's it's like a tighter wood. It will not allow alcohol molecules out of the barrel in evaporation because the molecules are essentially too big is like the easy way to think about it.
So
It's
only
not
the water evaporates.
But water actually can't escape. And so even though alcohol does boil off before water, so what should happen if it was something that was not white oak, when it gets really hot and the stuff starts evaporating off, you lose a lot of alcohol because alcohol would evaporate first. But when those alcohols start to evaporate off, they actually don't escape the barrel at the same rate that water does. And so if a barrel sits on the middle or top floor, you actually gain proof. And so that's how you actually get like 100 for us. Some of these private barrels or just single barrel offerings, they come in at 120 or above. And then sometimes, you'll see something from a Heaven Hill or a Sazerac product that's at 130 or above, or Beam sometimes will have really high proof stuff. That's how you're able to get stuff at 120 or above, even when you're putting it to the barrel lower proof, is especially on the top floors. Sometimes you can get really, really high proof stuff and lose a whole lot of water. I think, though, that the most important thing besides our distillation proof is the way we age things. We don't age anything lower than 6 years, really, that goes into any of our bourbons. We have had some 5-year-old in the Wild Turkey 81 in the past, but I don't think there's 5-year-old in it anymore. I think it's all 6 or older. The only thing that's going to have anything in there that's lower than 6 years is American Honey or RTDs that we're selling to Australia, stuff like that. Anything that's put into a bottle right now that's Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, it's going to be right around 6 years or older. And that's because that's what Jimmy likes. He likes 6 to 12, maybe 13-year-old whiskey at the highest. And that's what he's always liked. That's what he, kind of grew up in the industry making. And that's still really what we do. So most other people's baseline products are right around 4 years old. You start getting quote unquote premium at 6 or 8, maybe 10 years old. And that's the majority of the whiskey we're making on site's right around 8 to 10. It's our sweet spot. We're not ever going to get away from that. And I think that's
your price point's amazing too.
Yeah. For the ages we have, I'm really happy with where our price points are right now. I wouldn't be surprised if Campari, takes price on a few things, but I do like that they've kind of kept everything at a super affordable price. Even the stuff sometimes that, gets really hot.
I'll pretend I didn't hear that.
Yeah. And Rare Breed kind of had a run a year or two ago where people started to really figure out that Rare Breed was really good. This 116, I think, like the current Rare Breed is really good. It'd be really easy for a company to just tack on, because this happens all the time in the industry, tack on another $25, $30 because it's a hot product right now. And Campari's chosen not to do that. And I love our product range. But I think the reason why it really stands out, stuff like Rare Breed or even 101, when you compare the flavor profile to 101 to everybody else's just normal baseline product, it's got so much more flavor. It's got so much more going on because we've distilled at that low proof and because we're aging it a long time. So how those flavors develop inside of the barrel as that whiskey it expands out when it gets hot and gets into the deepest parts of that wood, the caramelization of the wood, so the wood itself, is going to combine with the alcohols, the congeners, the esters, all the flavoring components that are found in that whiskey, and oxygen. All three of those things will combine, and they'll form essentially very long flavor chains. Is how it would look chemically. And the longer they stay in that barrel, the more gets added on to those flavor chains over time. And so something that would have just been, creme brulee burnt sugar, so super simple, it gets another year or two with more oxygen and more wood flavor, and then it turns into green apple. And then you let that sit and age for a little while, and then that turns into maybe a darker fruit. And then that turns into oaky, chocolatey, more bitter stuff as it gets to maybe 15 years old, And so really how you're going to pick your flavor profiles is not only, proof, barrel location, but most of it has to do really with age. So, you can pick for us an 8-year-old to a 10-year-old barrel. You're getting a whole lot of kind of classic turkey / like Russell's flavor profile with a good mix of caramels and vanillas, and then a little mature oak and maybe a little bit of fruit.
Yeah.
But then when you get to like Dad's kind of wheelhouse, where he's putting out a lot of for the Master's Keeps and the Russell's vintages and stuff like that, or even the Russell's 13 to 15-year-old whiskeys, you start picking up a little bit like of a darker flavor profile, heavier funk, like kind of like deep dark fruits, more of like a cocoa, sorghum, molasses, sweet tobacco thing. You start picking up way more oak. And I think that's really what sets us apart is almost all of our whiskeys are aged, twice as long as everybody else's baselines on average. And that along with the way we distill, I think those are the two key things to why our product line tastes the way it does.
Awesome. Well, guys, are you good with going over maybe 10 minutes or so here? Just because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Awesome. I do want to taste the whiskey and talk about the whiskey for just a few minutes. My tasting notes were based off of 3 barrels mainly, which were barrel 21610, 21334, and 21032. And that's where my tasting notes came from, because those were kind of the barrels that I initially had tasted from. So I'd love, as always, like if you have your own tasting notes, if you have a specific barrel. I know other members always like to see what other people think of the barrels that they got. And I know Benny and Bruce have their own versions of the Kentucky Spirit. I was distracted because I was remembering the picture on the back of Benny's bottle. Benny, can you show everyone the sticker on the back of your bottle? That's Jimmy Russell as Buddha. And Bruce, how did he get that nickname?
Well, Jimmy actually was the first master distiller to start traveling kind of the world as a bourbon guy. He started in the 80s. And Japan was by far our biggest export market and still is one of our top 3 markets in the whole world. And when he went over there, he found that they loved him. People became kind of obsessed with Jimmy because in Japan, like, tenure is a big thing. Like, being at a place for a super long time means a lot in Japanese culture, being a master of a single craft. And Jimmy is kind of the epitome of that. And also because, he's a pretty big guy now. If you've seen him recently, he used to be way bigger. He used to be twice the size he is now. And because he was such a large man, people just kind of, chuckled, and he had that big round belly, and they started calling him Buddha. And there was actually a written article about him that one of the first times he went to Japan, and they called him the Buddha of bourbon because he was just kind of this like lovable, jovial, Santa Claus-esque figure. He would show up to town with his whiskey presents,
That's awesome.
And he thinks the nickname's funny. My grandma doesn't like it, though. She doesn't like it.
Awesome. So, I put my tasting notes here from the kind of 3 barrels that I was tasting from at the time. On nose, I get apple pie, orange marmalade, caramel, and obviously some oak. The kind of the biggest flavor profile thing that I found between each barrel kind of consistently popped up was like this walnut, like cherry chocolate, like a little bit of coconut thing going on too. And like, I just couldn't help but thinking of like German chocolate cake. It was like the big thing that popped up for me. So like consistent between barrels, I got those notes, some ginger, clove, dates. And then obviously the finish here is pretty long and lingering, as Brucey said, very bold characteristics. And I get like this lingering kind of oiliness on my palate of that kind of has walnut associated with it. And I was actually, I think I was messaging with Sam Nash Green, who is on the call, and he was like, walnut, really walnut. And I was like, yeah, dude, I don't know. I just can't, I can't, I'm getting it consistently. So those were my tasting notes. I don't know if you guys want to share a couple notes as well, and then we can get into some questions.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Benny.
Yeah. I was also going to say, if you all are throwing tasting notes in the chat, it'd actually be cool if you can. The barrel numbers aren't going to mean much to us without the sheet. So if you throw in your warehouse location and warehouse letter, then we can maybe help relate that and give you more information too. What I'll say about Kentucky Spirit in general is, this is we said our baseline stuff is about 6. This is starting around 8.5 years old for Kentucky Spirit. So that's kind of the perfect age, what Bruce mentioned, where these flavor chains, this chemical process in the barrel, where these flavor esters evolve through ethanol, fusel alcohol, wood acid, oxygen. They create the apple, the cherry, the pear, the apricot, all the things that if you said to Jimmy Russell, he's going to tell you he didn't put any of that shit in his whiskey. But, tasting is subjective, of course. And often even at only 8.5, I get a big cherry note, and I also get kind of a savory spice or herbal character a lot with Kentucky Spirit. I find that it could sometimes give like a leathery note, which is kind of cool, kind of like just old wood and leather. Like if you can imagine what that smells like, like old furniture, that kind of like musty, dusty, it doesn't necessarily sound like something you'd want to eat, but it's really cool in a whiskey, in my opinion. And it's really complex.
Dusty oak, as I usually call it, dusty oak.
Dusty oak. It's like when you walk into one of these old warehouses down in Kentucky and bourbon is, evaporating around you, if you will, and you can smell it in the air along with all the other timber that the rickhouse is built of. And that's one of my favorite notes, is that kind of old wood, the leathery, and that tobacco spice. And that's going to vary because you guys have, I believe, 8 different barrels out there between all of your stores, and that you all tuning in right now could potentially have. But I think cherry is a big one, leather, spice, which could be cinnamon, clove, all the way to tobacco. And then the caramel and the vanilla, they're definitely super present as well. What I'll also say is Kentucky Spirit has a really good body and mouthfeel. Just the way it coats your palate, it stands out more so than other whiskeys.
Yeah, I think Benny nailed it on the flavor profile. I agree with him. I think that extra water that gets added into some of these picks with Kentucky Spirit, it has this, he said herbal, and I kind of agree with that. It's almost like tea, the flavor profile I pick up a lot in Kentucky Spirit when they just add that little bit of water in there. I've seen some notes over here in the comments, though, talked about some fruitiness in a particular barrel. That doesn't surprise me because you have a Tyrone E barrel. And I thought a lot of those were a little less like traditional caramel vanilla sweet and a little bit more fruity. And I saw some people got the chance to try the McBrayer B barrel. It's the first year that we've ever had McBrayer in the whole system, in the program. And I'm the one that actually sent these barrels to you all because I'm the private barrel manager. And I specifically tried to send a pretty good array of like different places. And I was excited to see what you all thought of the McBrayer B fourth fill pick. First year it's ever been in the program. I thought they were the most interesting, not maybe the best because, it's all subjective. All these barrels are hand selected to be kind of the best every year. They just all have different flavor profiles. And then there is one, Tyrone G, which is my dad's favorite warehouse probably.
I have the McBrayer right here, so I'm going to pour a little bit.
Nice. And I think that one's 0032.
Yeah.
So there's Tyrone G in here, which is Dad's kind of favorite traditionally. It usually ages. Now this isn't always the case, but it usually ages, in my opinion, quote unquote, like Eddie style whiskey, which is a little bit softer, a little bit like more sweet cream, vanilla, creme brulee. Kind of picks up more on the back end. It's not as aggressive up front, not as much flavor up front as a lot of Jimmy's whiskeys. And then I would say Tyrone B, which you all also have. That's probably my favorite traditionally. It sits right next to A, so it's one of those 125-year-ish warehouses. I think those warehouses age pretty neat whiskey because they're a little bit smaller. They're just built differently than the modern ones. And we're in Warehouse A a lot. It's like where we give tours in and out of. It's where we do the private picks. And that does like kind of mess with the aging of the whiskey because it messes with the overall temperature. So I like Warehouse B a little bit better because you kind of get that old school warehouse and people aren't in and out ruining the whiskey. Like we are sometimes, I think, in A, where we're keeping the temperature a little bit more even in there, except compared to most of the other rick houses. So y'all have got Camp Nelson A. Camp Nelson is it's hot right now. It's probably the hottest location that we have in the program. Everybody wants Camp Nelson A or Camp Nelson F. Tyrone G, Tyrone E, which has those fruit notes I was talking about. Tyrone B,
clearly, my bottle of the Camp Nelson is the first one I finished. So
Yeah, my man, because that is good. And then there is one Tyrone F barrel in here as well, which is super interesting. We've never had Tyrone F in the program either. Tyrone F is a warehouse that probably won't be around that much longer. It got twisted up in some bad weather, and so most of the support beams are pretty badly damaged. So maybe one of the last years maybe the only year you'll ever see a Tyrone F, because I think that warehouse is going to come down here pretty soon. So pretty cool selection. And for this year, there weren't that many warehouses. So I think you all got at least one barrel from every warehouse that was in the program this year.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we could all talk about whiskey for much longer, but I do want to get to these questions. So I think we could have about 20, 25 minutes if you guys are open to it. So as mentioned before, we have some prizes to give away. First place is going to be a signed bottle of Rare Breed from Bruce, Jimmy, and Eddie Russell. Second place is a neon sign from Wild Turkey, and the third place is the Russell's backpack. So Renee Quintanilla asks, what food would pair best with Wild Turkey? Let's just go with 101 because obviously, well, let's talk about this one actually. Why am I going with 101? Let's talk about Kentucky Spirit. Like what food would you pair best with this? I mean, barbecue comes to mind pretty immediately.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think I just read an interview with Eddie Russell, Bruce's dad, but he says barbecue, steaks, just kind of like red meat, like almost think like bourbon could probably go with most things that red wine can go with. Because it does have tannins. It has, it's got a little spice. It's got great sweetness. It's got fruit notes, especially with Wild Turkey. You do get those dark fruit. So, yeah, I think that'd be my answer.
Yeah. Barbecue, grilled meats, really good with chocolate. Also, in my opinion, really, really good with like fruit desserts. Like in my family, just like fried fruit desserts, like a peach cobbler or fried apple or blueberry, blackberry hand pies, like a little fruit pie with a glass of bourbon. It's hard to beat that.
Nice. Cool. We have a bit more of a technical question here. Wes M asks, what do you look for in viable cooperage? Is the wood open air seasoned? What do you look for in the wood when making the barrels?
A good cooperage, you just want a really consistency is the thing you're looking for in a cooperage. Anybody that's doing cooperaging at a high level is making probably a pretty good barrel. So the most important thing for somebody our size is that barrel going to come in each and every day consistently? Is it going to age whiskey consistently? Are we going to get the same liquid and evaporation loss? Because you do lose some to liquid loss as well if a barrel's not put together exactly right. We use mostly independent stave, and I mean, they're the big guys, so we get a super consistent barrel. They are air dried. Everything in Wild Turkey is air dried at least 6 months. I think typically ours are about 6 to 9. Have been a little bit older. They can be older, but generally 6 to 9 months. So I think we're the second oldest in the industry. I think Makers is always at least 9 months. Theirs might be a year. I don't think that you're going to get as good of a barrel if you don't air dry is what I'd say. And then as far as the wood, I'm not an expert on that kind of stuff, to be honest. To Jimmy, he's just always wanted wood from very particular places because he says the wood, quote unquote, breathes and ages better. So he would probably know that kind of stuff more than me. So, but we do get our wood. There's another question in here. I don't know if it's actually in this thing, but we get our wood mainly from the Ozarks and Missouri, Arkansas, kind of in that area. That's where we think we get the best white oak from.
Cool. Let's see here. Vincent de Blasio wants to know what's your favorite cocktail with Wild Turkey? And as someone who just started drinking bourbon, why do you think bourbon? Why do you all like bourbon more than other spirits?
Go ahead, Benny.
Yeah, so I mean, don't get me started on cocktails because we'll be here another hour as well. But one of the most unique cocktails I've ever made with Wild Turkey was my version of an oatmeal raisin cookie in an old fashioned. So definitely like an after dinner drink. There's a technique we use. It's become more and more common over the years called fat washing. The most well-known version of this technique is where people use bacon fat to infuse bourbon for either a Bloody Mary or an old fashioned. What I ended up doing was using browned butter. So I literally just brown butter in a pan until it gets kind of caramelized. I mix it in with the bourbon. I literally whisk it in and then throw it in the freezer. All the fat goes to the top and freezes in almost like a little puck. And then I can separate it back out, but you're still left with this like extremely oily, buttery mouthfeel. So that's just the bourbon. Then I take a syrup that I make from brown sugar, cinnamon, clove, and a little bit of Pedro Jimenez sherry, which is basically like raisin juice. It's like super dark fruit sweet. If you're not familiar with Pedro Jimenez, out of all the different sherries, it literally has the same sugar content as simple syrup. So it actually works really well in this place because, you know, we're basically using it as part of our simple syrup. And then I added a little bit of just Angostura bitters and I believe I used the black walnut bitters as well. So you get like a nuttiness, a spice, you got the buttery mouthfeel, the savory, the sweetness, you get the brown sugar, the spices, the raisins, and that's all in one drink. So that's probably the most unique cocktail, or one of my favorites at least, that comes to mind on the spot. And then for your second part of the question, as a new bourbon drinker, why do we like bourbon and why would we recommend bourbon to you, I guess is what you're asking. I think, you know, again, like Bruce mentioned before, bourbon is America's national spirit. As of 1964, bourbon can only be made in the United States. So one, it's unique to us. It's something we should be proud of. You know, Scotland has Scotch, Mexico has tequila, Brazil has cachaça, France has champagne and cognac. We have bourbon. So we should be super proud of it. We should learn as much as we can about it, right? I personally like bourbon because I do like the sweetness. You get a lot of those really delicious flavors from oak, from the lignin in the oak itself is where we're getting this delicious vanilla and caramel flavor that's nice and sweet. But I find that at least in Wild Turkey bourbons, you get a nice balance of spice. So it's not like you're just drinking a liqueur and after dinner sweet drink, even though it has a lot of sweet and fruity characteristics. I think bourbon's awesome because it gives you a balance. And also, you know, back to the first question as well, in general, it's very cocktail friendly. So there's so many ways you can consume bourbon, whether it's just with Coke or ginger ale or in an old fashioned or some crazy cocktail that I come up with.
Cool. Love it. Love everything you just said. And that brown butter fat washed whiskey is definitely something I'm going to try. Here's a good question. Diego Eros asks, evaporation is a huge issue for supply and financial, and obviously financially. A fun thought I had would be wrap barrels in plastic or other non-porous materials to reduce evaporation. Has this been done?
Yeah, it ruins the whiskey.
Bruce is shaking his head.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it has been done, and it works. It ruins your whiskey. Liquid losses, you need the loss.
Yeah.
You want the evaporation to happen. You need that. You need that to happen. You're not saving anything except for bad whiskey at that point. But it's not a bad idea because people have tried it. People have put like lacquers and paints basically around it. There's been like wraps. They look like big arm sleeves, that they'll wrap around barrels. People have tried everything. I'm not going to rat out the
barrel
company.
condoms or sorry.
Yeah, I'm not going to rat out the company because I don't want to embarrass them. But I've got a buddy that sold his whiskey. I think Benny's heard this story. I got a buddy that sold his whiskey company to a big corporation in the last few years, made a bunch of money. And that company doesn't really know how whiskey's made. And they asked him, can we put something around there? And we don't like that liquid loss. He told them we lose 5% a year. Their jaws dropped, No, you want that to happen. It's not, and here's like another not very well kept secret if you actually know. People think that there's oh no, there's not enough supply. There's not a bourbon shortage. Because if there was, there wouldn't be 50 new mom and pop brands open up every year.
Yeah.
Because everybody's buying whiskey. There's a ton of whiskey out there. Now there is, I think, running a little bit short on supply of like really good special whiskey because people are actually bottling that stuff up now. But you do want that liquid loss. And yes, people have tried that. It's not a bad idea. If we could do something like that and it wouldn't affect the taste, then we would
do it in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah, we would definitely do it.
Yeah.
Because Kentucky's the only place in the world where we're actually taxed on the aging liquid every year. So when you're making bourbon in Kentucky, every year you have to pay a tax as if there is 53 gallons in the barrel. And every year it appreciates in value because they know whiskey's worth more. So if a barrel's 20 years old, you're paying super high taxes on if there's 53 gallons of 20-year-old whiskey. And there's usually, 10 gallons. So, yeah, we would definitely wrap it if we could.
Rick Cerna asks, how do Jimmy and Eddie enjoy their whiskey when they're drinking it?
Jimmy always neat, and he likes rare breed. It's his thing. Benny is the cocktail guy. Benny's actually, I'll toot Benny's horn a little bit for him. He is like as good as anybody out there at cocktails. So he is like one extreme, and then Jimmy's the other extreme. He doesn't like cocktails at all. He doesn't even want ice normally with his whiskey or water. He wants it neat. Dad usually likes his whiskey on an ice cube. We're all spoiled now, so even Dad has big ice cubes at home.
What about Bruce? What about you?
I like shots of whiskey and cheap beer is what I like. Let's be honest, yeah. So I normally drink my whiskey neat. But yeah, I'm like Jimmy. I like high proof stuff neat in a glass.
Nice. Let's say Matt. I'm sorry, Matt. I'm going to butcher your last name. Ignagic. Other than being barrel proof, what characteristics do you feel differ between Kentucky Spirit and the rare breed line? I don't think Kentucky Spirit's not. This one is 101 proof, right?
Yeah, as compared to 116.8. I think it's really the flavor profile, and it's like what we're thinking of when we're putting together these whiskeys. Rare breed has always been kind of the quintessential Jimmy thing, where Kentucky Spirit is almost just the most premium version of 101. So something that Jimmy didn't start, he's just doing, I think, his favorite version of, the cool old bottle Benny's got there. So Kentucky Spirit to me is just like a more elegant, refined version of 101. It's very classic in flavor profile, caramels and vanillas and toffees and a little bit of oak and maybe a hint of fruitiness. It tastes like 101 in a really good way. It's very classic. Rare breed, I think, has a darker flavor, maybe a little bit more depth of flavor, just because it has that extra age in there with that 12. When I think of rare breed, I think of a lot more like spice, a lot more like pepper and cinnamon, and also I think a lot more of like deep, earthy sorghum, sweet tobacco, molasses. Like Benny was saying, even kind of like leathery at times. There is just a kind of like a dark underbelly of rare breed that just does not exist, I don't think, in Kentucky Spirit. I think Kentucky Spirit is a lot more kind of classic bourbon. I do think, though, that it's not like always better one way or the other. I think Kentucky Spirit, because it is a single barrel offering and because it does have water added, when you find the right barrel and it really opens up the flavor profile of what was in that single barrel to begin with, I think Kentucky Spirit can reach a peak that rare breed never reaches because rare breed is a small batch. It's much more consistent bottle to bottle. And I think on average, rare breed might be a little bit better in my opinion. It's like more my thing. when I find like one or two of those really good Kentucky Spirit barrels, there's no rare breed that even comes close. Just what you're looking for.
Daniel Gorlick asks, considering the age of the distillery, what's the longest aged barrels that have come out? Do you all find that there's a specific range of ages that really hit the sweet spot for the brand? Yeah.
Benny, do you want to answer the stuff about age?
Yeah.
Second part there?
Yeah. So the oldest thing that we've ever released age statement wise is 17 years. We have used 20-year-old barrels in a batch before. So just to elaborate on that, with bourbon and all whiskeys for that matter, the age statement comes from the youngest liquid in the batch. So when I say we put 20-year-old in a batch, it was with 10 and a bunch of like 13 and 15. So by law, that would technically be a 10-year-old, even though it has plenty of older liquid in it. The oldest release we've done is 17, and we've actually done it 3 different times. So we did a 17-year back in 2001 as a limited edition product. It was actually still before bourbon was quite as popular as it is now here in the States. So when we did this original 17-year-old 101, it was released in Japan. So it is something that you can still Google and find. It's probably going to run you about $1,200 a bottle now.
Wow.
Then a decade and a half later, in 2015, we started our Master's Keep series. So I actually have some Master's Keep here. This is not the exact one I'm speaking about, but if you've seen these bottles before, they always have the same shape, but they have different color neckers and boxes that they come in. And this is actually the third 17 we've done. The second 17 we did was an experimental aging that went into aged in our traditional rick houses as well as stone rick houses. So Bruce just busted out the OG 17. That's a 20-year-old bottle. The literal bottle itself has been sitting there for 20 years. It's from 2001. The liquid
And he
inside,
hasn't opened it?
and that is an unopened one.
No, yeah, I haven't opened it.
And then we did the 17-year-old Master's Keep, which was a very low proof out of the barrel as it was aged in stone warehouses. And then 2 years ago, we released Master's Keep Bottled in Bond. So Bottled in Bond, as some of you probably know, has a whole nother set of laws in addition to being a straight bourbon, one of which all the whiskey in this product has to be distilled in the same season, meaning every drop of it is the same age, and it has to be at least 4 years old.
So how do you do a bottled in bond product with 2 master distillers?
So this was all distilled when technically Jimmy was the only master distiller when this was actually produced, though, if you think about it, because for this to be, so this is 17 years old also, as you can see on the neck. This would have been distilled in like 2003 to be released in 2020, I believe. So, yeah, we've done 3 17s as the oldest we've ever done. We've put 20-year-old in other products, and then just to kind of talk to the ages in general. Remember, we only have the one mash bill, one yeast, one process, one type of barrel. So
and what was the mash bill again?
It's oh, sorry, I was on mute. Anyway, all of our products are based on age or age ranges, and that's because we like to kind of be transparent and give you as much information as possible. So like where our baseline Wild Turkey 101 is at least 6 years old, it's actually got 7 and 8 year old in it. Rare breed is 6, 8, and 12, where Kentucky Spirit is just 8.5 because it's a single barrel, right? So batch size, barrel selection, age, and bottle proof is how we make all these products different. Because at the end of the day, when these barrels get filled on day one, when they're stamped Wild Turkey, they're all the same. We don't know if they're going to become Kentucky Spirit or Rare Breed or a Master's Keep until they mature. And based on where they mature in which warehouses, it's not necessarily like we go back to the same place over and over to create a certain product, but there is certain floors within the warehouses that yield certain flavors that we're looking for.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then we got to choose. First question is Steve Cooley says, my great-grandmother passed down a recipe for bourbon sweet potatoes, and it's always a hit at Thanksgiving. With Turkey Day coming up, does the Russell family have any bourbon-based food recipes or marinades that kind of make the Thanksgiving Day table?
No. No.
Cookies, chocolate chip cookies.
The bottle.
I mean, we have a lot of family recipes that like are very near and dear to me and like very special to my family. But my grandma makes bourbon balls. I guess would be like the one thing she's known for with bourbon in it. But I think she actually uses American honey. She doesn't even use technically bourbon whenever she's making it. We don't use it to cook. We drink it. But the best thing that we have at Thanksgiving by far, my grandma's an old school cook. She cooks everything from scratch. So, whether it be, she makes her own pastas and stuff, makes her own breads, everything. And she'll cook almost a whole week before Thanksgiving and cook bread and then let that bread get a little stale and then make dressing out of that bread she's cooked and stuff it inside of the bird and cook it along with that turkey. And man, her dressing is like, it's by far the best thing I eat every year, and I eat it once a year. So that's the big thing. And then I know Benny didn't want to tell it. I'll tell our recipe. It's 75-13-12. Since you actually did ask. 75 bourbon, 13 rye, 12% malt is the bourbon recipe. So I guess that's our family recipe that we hold dear.
Benny's so upset right now.
That's all right. I can tell.
Bruce, we're on YouTube.
All right. You can Google it, and it's the first thing that pops up. Might as well tell it,
Cool. So I have one last question here, and then we'll choose some winners. Brian Peterson asks, what's an experiment you really want to do, or maybe Eddie or Jimmy really want to do that haven't been able to try yet, whether it be mash, barrel age, etc. Is there something you guys have wanted to do that just haven't been able to, or is in the pipeline?
In the pipeline, there's actually a lot of things in the works. Might be doing something like a higher end Forgiven maybe down the lines, like something we're working on a little bit. We've talked about utilizing different barrels from, different Campari products actually. So Campari owns an amazing Jamaican rum called Appleton. And I think
I'm trying to find my bottle.
Yeah, I've got some Appleton 21 right over here. I was drinking actually last night. Such a great distillery with a lot of good liquid, and I think that we might be asking for some of their barrels to age some stuff in just to see what happens. I think that's cool.
I am beyond excited about that, to be quite honest with you.
We've never really done anything like that before, and so I'm super excited, especially because I think we asked specifically for kind of like funky pot still stuff. So that's exciting. If I got my say, when Jimmy started, we actually didn't make our own rye whiskey. That's its own weird story, but we sourced rye whiskey from Pinco, or what most people would know today as like the original Michter's distillery. Doesn't have anything to do with Michter's today, besides the name. But back when it used to be in Pennsylvania, when we bought our rye whiskey from them, it was a different recipe. It was a little bit higher rye than what it is now. And I think it would be cool to make the original recipe at our distillery, but rye, especially high rye whiskey, is very, very hard on your equipment. Rye's hard to work with, and so that'd take some convincing. For Jimmy, he already makes the products that he would want to make. He would just say Rare Breed or 101 or whatever. And then Dad, I mean, he's kind of been the driving force on all the Master's Keeps and stuff anyway. So I think he's already got to do a lot of what he would want to do. I think if he got to do anything else, that he might actually change the recipe a little bit. And that's something we're actually talking about for the first time ever. Different grain bills, different yeasts, different malts maybe. A little bit of everything. Except for we're probably not going to change distillation proof if I had to guess. and probably not going to change the way we age things either. But everything else is kind of up for grabs. Because I also think we might do some lower entry proof stuff and put it back into the barrel at 107 and try to get something super low proof out of there at barrel proof.
Awesome. This isn't a question from the group, but Paulina wants me to ask if Jimmy likes rye.
Absolutely not. He's never enjoyed a single rye whiskey he's ever had. At best, he'll like be like, yeah, it's okay. But he doesn't enjoy rye. He knows what good rye tastes like, according to him. He just doesn't even like the good stuff. Yeah. I've seen him drink one rye, though, like willingly. I think Benny might remember, too. We actually did a private barrel of rye whiskey for Behind the Barrel one year. And a buddy of ours actually opened up his private barrel like the second that they got the bottles. And we had told him not to, keep that bottle for a little while. But he opened it right up and asked Jimmy to drink out of the bottle with him. And Jimmy is he's a party man through and through. So he did it. He tilted it up and took a big swig. And the guy was so excited. And Jimmy just looked at him and he said, it's not very good, That's Jimmy. He doesn't like cocktails. He doesn't like rye whiskey. He wants high proof 8-year-old bourbon. That's what he wants.
All right. Well, before we choose some winners here, just want to, you may have seen me snacking. Just everyone got a bag of Cappy's Kentucky bourbon caramel corn in their bag. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. And then everyone should have got a kind of a redemption thing here for Whiskey Club members for a complimentary appetizer at the restaurant for some of the new appetizers we have. So hopefully you guys can come in and enjoy that. Just want to highlight those things. So guys, let's talk about winners here. So I'm just going to run through them really quick.
Yeah.
We got best food pairing. We got how does Jimmy and Eddie enjoy their whiskey when relaxing? We got most unique cocktail. We have, so I'm just going down. What is the characteristic differences between Kentucky Spirit and the Rare Breed line? We have what's the longest age barrels that have come out of Wild Turkey, and what's the age range that kind of is the sweet spot? We have the recipes, the bourbon sweet potatoes, and what other recipes your family has for whiskey and food. The question about what do you look for in viable cooperage, and then the experiment that you guys have wanted to do but haven't yet. And by the way, if you guys do anything with Appleton, please keep me on the list of first people to know, because that sounds amazing. So you guys, I guess let's. I don't know if you guys got all that, but what would you say that? Do you guys want to do 1, 2, 3 or 3, 2, 1? What do you guys think?
Doesn't matter to me. I've got the 3 that I liked written down. I really like.
Do you want to, Benny? Do you want to? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
No, you're fine. I really like the age range question. About where to find the specific range or the sweet spot. I like that question quite a bit.
Benny, are you good with that? Is that the number one question? Are you good with that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. Daniel Gorlick, you are the soon-to-be new owner of a signed bottle by Bruce, Eddie, and Jimmy Russell. So I know my people in the background are listening. So Daniel Gorlick, we got first place. So what was the second place? We'll give it to Benny. Is that okay with you, Bruce? Can we give Benny the second place?
Yeah.
I think we got to give it to the geeky question about the cooperage, because that's like, I like that he brought that up and asked that, because that's something most people probably are least familiar with, is the fact that even before a barrel is made, these wood planks literally sit out in a parking lot for 6 to 9 months minimum, so that the tannins and other things can leach out of the wood. So it's a really important step in the barrel making process. I thought that was a really cool question.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And then Benny, that is Wes M. I don't have a last name here. I believe that's Wes M. Second place, you're the new proud owner of a Wild Turkey Neon, which we will get out to you. And then Bruce, I'll pass it back to you for the third place, which is the Russell's backpack and the shaker and that fun stuff.
Well, since Benny put together kind of like a little cocktail kit, I think we should give it to the guy or gal, I don't remember, that asked about most interesting cocktail, because it also let Benny kind of geek out a little bit about it.
I agree. That was good.
It was a good answer and a good question.
So that is Vincent de Blasio. We got a cool backpack and kind of some shaker tins and some cool stuff coming your way. So hopefully my people, not hopefully, because they're great. So Taylor, I know you got all that stuff logged down, and I know we went over quite a bit this time, and just a wealth of knowledge and just a really great call this month, and look forward to obviously doing more business with you guys at Eureka. And thank you for allowing us to pick some cool barrels for the Whiskey Club this month. I know our members enjoyed it, and thank you very much, guys. I hope you have a good evening. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. Hopefully we'll keep doing the private barrel program and maybe get Trevor and a few other folks out at the distillery to pick them in person.
I will hold you to that.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Yeah.